A sealed door, a stopped robot, a system of concealment. But there is a world no system can hide, because it is already underwater. 2025, the Mediterranean Sea, 30 kilometers off the northern coast of Egypt. A crane cable tightens against the weight of something enormous on the seabed. The water around the hull turns brown, not from depth, but from centuries of silt shaken loose by the lift. Salt water streams down a 3-ton block of carved granite as it finally breaks the surface. Marine growth peels away in gray-green sheets, and then the face appears. Eyes, a double crown, the faintest trace of a pharaonic smile cut into stone that has not seen daylight in over 1,000 years. A sphinx of Ramesses II, pulled from the ocean floor by Franck Godiot, the French underwater archaeologist who has spent more than 2 decades mapping what lies beneath this stretch of coast. He stands on the deck of the research vessel Princess Duda and watches the crane swing the sphinx over the rail. He has done this before, many times, because this sphinx was not alone. Spread across the seafloor beneath his boat lies an entire city. Canopus, sister settlement to thonisheracleion, the port that once controlled every ship entering the Nile Delta. Temples with stone columns still standing upright in the sediment. Ceremonial halls with carved relief panels half buried in sand. Statues taller than the divers who photographed them. Streets paved with limestone slabs, their grid pattern visible on sonar before a single person went down. 2 cities, both swallowed by the Mediterranean when earthquakes and tidal surges liquefied the clay beneath their foundations. Both invisible from the surface. Both found only because one man kept diving when everyone else stopped looking. And now the numbers. The European Institute for Underwater Archaeology has catalogued 64 shipwrecks, 3 temple complexes, 16 monumental statues, and more than 700 anchors from this one stretch of Egyptian coastline alone. That is not interpretation, that is inventory. And here is the question that inventory leaves unanswered. If one team found this much on one coast, what is sitting on every other coast that no one has checked? One stretch of coast, 700 anchors, and apparently not interesting enough. The cold Atlantic gives the first answer. Brittany, western France. Tidal currents strong enough to drag a boat sideways. In 2024, marine archaeologists lower side-scan sonar equipment into the water off the coast near Erlanik, a few kilometers from the famous Karnak alignments, thousands of standing stones arranged in parallel rows that tourists photograph every summer. What comes back on the sonar screen is not geological. Stone alignments, rows of them, deliberate, geometric, unmistakable, sitting on the ocean floor at a depth that was dry grassland 10,000 years ago. When measured with modern instruments, the submerged structures match the construction logic of the standing stones on shore. Same granite types, same spacing intervals, same deliberate astronomical orientation. But here is the part they usually leave out of the story. The underwater ones are older. The stratigraphic data is unambiguous. These stones were erected when the seabed was still a meadow, before the water rose and covered them. The thing tourists pay to see on land is a later copy. The original is 12 meters underwater. And it has never been excavated, not once. Wait, let that settle. If the submerged alignments predate the famous onshore monuments, if the original construction happened on land that is now ocean floor, then the accepted timeline for megalithic culture in Western Europe is not just incomplete, it is built on the wrong foundation. We have been studying the echo and calling it the source. And this is where the scale becomes impossible to ignore. After the last ice age, global sea levels rose approximately 120 meters. That is confirmed by geological data, sediment cores drilled from ocean floors, and fossil coral terraces on 6 continents all converge on the same number, 120 meters. And now let us look at what that number means for archaeology. The continental shelf, that shallow, habitable band ringing every landmass, averages 80 kilometers of exposed land at today's sea level. Roll the clock back 15,000 years before the melt, and that shelf was dry, fertile, flat, laced with rivers draining into rich estuaries. Every river delta, every sheltered bay, every gentle coastline where early humans would have settled, fished, farmed, and built, exposed and accessible. Now stack 120 vertical meters of ocean on top. That entire band of habitation, the most resource-rich, most accessible real estate on the planet, disappears beneath the waves. Not destroyed, not eroded into nothing, swallowed whole, with whatever was built on it still sitting in place under silt and salt water. The dry land model of civilization says it all started inland: Mesopotamia, the Nile Valley, the Indus. Neat, convenient, and it ignores a fact that every anthropologist quietly acknowledges. Humans cluster around water, always have. Coastal ecosystems, estuaries, tidal flats, mangrove forests, coral reefs are the richest on Earth. Every major ancient port, every river mouth, every sheltered harbor where fishing and trade would have thrived sits in exactly the zone the rising ocean consumed. We study what survived above the waterline and call it the complete record. That is like walking into a burned library, picking up the pages that blew out the window, and claiming you read the book. And the numbers make it worse. Oceanographers estimate that roughly 25 million square kilometers of currently submerged continental shelf were habitable dry land during the last glacial maximum. 25 million. For context, the entire landmass of Europe is 10 million. We are talking about 2.5 Europes of coastal territory, fertile, accessible, river-fed, that simply does not appear on any archaeological map because it is under the ocean. Not a single square meter of it has been systematically excavated. Not one. The accepted framework does not account for this territory. It does not even acknowledge it exists. 2.5 Europes of habitable land, filed under not our department. But that is just the beginning. It gets worse. Between Britain and mainland Europe, there was once a landmass larger than modern-day Britain. Rivers ran through it, wide, slow rivers fed by glacial melt and seasonal rain. Forests of oak, hazel, and pine covered its rolling hills. Herds of red deer and aurochs moved across its plains. People lived on it for thousands of years, hunted, fished, built seasonal camps, carved tools from flint, processed animal hides on stone platforms. The land had a name: Doggerland. Today, it sits beneath the gray, churning water of the North Sea, and the only reason we know it existed is because the sea keeps giving it back in fragments. Every year, trawler nets scraping the seabed haul up flint tools with sharp working edges, carved bone points, antler harpoons polished smooth by use, the teeth and vertebrae of animals that have not set foot on that ground in 8,000 years. And then, the University of Bradford decided to stop waiting for the trawlers and started mapping. Using seismic reflection data, the same technology oil companies deploy to locate underground reservoirs, Vincent Gaffney and his team rebuilt the entire terrain hidden beneath the waves. What emerged on their screens was not featureless ocean floor. It was a country. Hills, river valleys, marshland basins thick with organic sediment, estuaries opening into what would have been tidal flats, and, clustered around the freshwater sources, dense concentrations of what appear to be settlement sites. Researchers have found evidence of seasonal camps, tool production areas, and animal processing zones spread across an area larger than the Netherlands. Not a myth, not a folk tale. A nation-sized landmass, drowned by rising water and absent from every historical timeline that starts with Sumer. The University of Bradford estimates that, at its peak, Doggerland could have supported a population of tens of thousands, a thriving Mesolithic society with complex resource management and seasonal migration patterns. The seismic data shows river systems large enough to sustain permanent settlements. The artifact density in certain zones rivals comparable sites onshore. And yet, the total archaeological budget ever allocated to underwater investigation of Doggerland? 0. Every artifact we have came up by accident in a fishing net. The North Sea has done more field work than the archaeologists. All that work to map it. No will to dig. No funding to understand what lived there, how they organized, what they built, or what they knew. And this is where it gets truly strange. Move south. The western coast of India, the Gulf of Cambay. In 2001, India's National Institute of Ocean Technology was running routine pollution monitoring with side-scan sonar, standard environmental survey work, when something appeared on the readout that had nothing to do with pollution. Geometry. Rectangular foundations arranged in rows, linear walls extending in straight lines for hundreds of meters, parallel channels that could only be man-made. The structures spread across 9 kilometers of seabed at a depth of roughly 40 meters. Dredging brought up artifacts, pottery fragments with unmistakable human decoration, a carved piece of wood, a fossilized section of human jawbone. The wood was sent for radiocarbon analysis. And now, the numbers. 9,500 years old. 9,500 years. That is 2,000 years older than Sumer, 3,000 years older than the earliest Indus Valley settlements, older than any urban center recognized by the accepted chronology. A settlement stretching 9 kilometers across the seabed, the footprint of a small modern city sitting at the bottom of a gulf where, according to what land-based archaeology assumes, nobody was supposed to have been building anything more complex than a campfire. The evidence points to a coastal civilization that flourished while the rest of the official record was still in the Stone Age. Not inland, not on a mountaintop, on a coast, now 40 meters underwater. You will say, contaminated samples, natural formations, inconclusive dredging. And those are legitimate objections. The methodology was far from perfect. But here is the detail people prefer to ignore. No full-scale excavation has ever been conducted at the Gulf of Cambay site. Not in 2001, not in 2010, not in 2020, not now. The sonar data sits in a government filing cabinet. The artifacts sit in a storage facility in Goa. 25 years of silence. The comfortable explanation is that the evidence is too weak to justify the cost. The uncomfortable truth is that nobody has spent a single rupee trying to make it stronger. Budget? 0. Conclusions? Definitive. Quite the methodology. And if that were the only site, you could file it under noise. But it is not. 400 kilometers south, the Gulf of Kutch, off the coast of Gujarat. The air hangs heavy with salt, the water milky with tidal sediment. Here, the ancient texts are unusually specific. The Mahabharata describes a city called Dwarka, built by Krishna, protected by massive walls, swallowed by the sea in a single catastrophic day after his death. For centuries, historians filed it under mythology. Then, marine archaeologists from India's Marine Archaeology Center put divers in the water at the exact location the texts describe, the western tip of the Kathiawar Peninsula. The bottom was not empty. Stone walls, massive stone anchors weighing over a ton each, fortification structures extending hundreds of meters across the seabed. An entire harbor layout emerged, berths, breakwaters, approach channels, consistent with a major Bronze Age port designed for heavy maritime traffic. Independent research has shown that the submersion layer aligns with post-glacial flooding patterns from the same period, the same event that drowned Doggerland, the same rise that submerged the Brittany megaliths, the same 120 meters. The myth gave coordinates. The ocean confirmed them. The geology dated them. Mythology as navigational chart. Quite a demotion for the historians who filed it under fiction. And here is why it matters beyond one city. If the Mahabharata gave accurate coordinates for Dwarka, coordinates that divers confirmed on the ocean floor, then every other ancient text that describes a city swallowed by water deserves a second look. Plato's description of a landmass beyond the Pillars of Hercules, the Tamil Sangam literature describing a kingdom called Kumari Kandam, south of India, consumed by the sea, the Aboriginal Australian oral traditions preserving accurate descriptions of coastlines that have been underwater for 7,000 years. These are not fairy tales told by credulous primitives. They may be the only surviving records of a world we have never bothered to search for, because it is wet. That was the ocean, now a landlocked lake 1,100 meters above sea level in the mountains of Central Asia. Issyk-Kul, Kyrgyzstan, one of the deepest alpine lakes in the world, more than 660 meters at its nadir, fed by over 80 glacial rivers. The water is so transparent you can see the bottom at 12 meters. In the early 2000s, a dive team descended along the northern shore and found stone structures on the lakebed that had no business being there. Walls built from cut blocks, rectangular building foundations, ceramic fragments with traces of colored glaze, bronze objects corroded green by centuries beneath the surface. Satellite imagery confirms what the divers saw: rectangular geometry beneath the water that no natural geological process produces. Medieval travelers documented a prosperous Silk Road trading post on the lake's northern shore, a commercial hub handling goods between China and the Mediterranean. When we overlay the data sets, sonar mapping, satellite imagery, artifact analysis, historical text, they converge on one conclusion. The city existed. It traded across continents. It is simply no longer on dry land. The lake rose. The city stayed. No headlines, no excavation teams, no funding applications. A Silk Road hub, a node in the most famous trade network in human history, sitting under clear water in a lake you can fly to in 4 hours from Moscow. The ceramic fragments alone could rewrite the trade chronology of Central Asia. The bronze artifacts could establish manufacturing connections across thousands of kilometers. But the fragments sit in a university basement, and the lake keeps its secrets, because no one with a budget has asked it to share them. And now, the thing that destroys the above-water version for good. Greece, the southern coast of the Peloponnese. The water here is shallow, 3 to 4 meters in places, and so clear that on a still morning you can see stone walls from the surface in a kayak. This is Pavlopetri, the only fully surveyed and mapped underwater city from the Bronze Age anywhere in the world. Streets laid out in a grid, buildings with doorways and interior rooms, courtyards, tombs, storage chambers. A city that functioned for nearly 2,000 years before subsidence and rising water covered it. 5,000 years old and still legible on the sea floor like a blueprint no one ordered. John Henderson from the University of Nottingham led the full three-dimensional photogrammetric survey. Every wall, every threshold, every room boundary is plotted. You can navigate through a digital reconstruction of Pavlopetri and trace where people lived, where they stored grain, where they traded goods, where they buried their dead 5 millennia ago. And here is the number that turns this from archaeology into indictment. Total excavation budget allocated to Pavlopetri since its discovery in 1967? Effectively, 0. Mapped, not excavated. Photographed, not understood. The streets are numbered, the walls are charted, and in nearly 60 years, no one has turned over a single stone to find out what lies beneath those floors. Upon closer inspection, Pavlopetri is not a mystery waiting for a breakthrough. It is a 5,000-year-old city with intact urban planning, visible to anyone with a snorkel, sitting 3 meters below the surface of a tourist coastline in a country that charges admission to ruins half its age. And the archaeological establishment has looked the other way for 60 years. This is where the lesson lands. The dry land model of history has a budget. Giza gets tens of millions. Pompeii gets tens of millions. Machu Picchu gets tens of millions. Every ancient site you have ever seen in a documentary is a land-based site. That is not because land-based sites are more important. It is because they are cheaper, drier, and easier to film. Underwater archaeology demands certified dive teams, research submersibles, side-scan sonar arrays, proton magnetometers, recompression chambers, crane barges, and weather windows measured in days rather than months. The cost per square meter of underwater excavation runs between 50 and 100 times higher than a comparable dig on land. And that single economic fact has bent the entire story of human origins. We have drawn the map of civilization from what we found above the waterline and declared it the whole picture. 17 sites across this series, 6 continents, the same impossible precision, the same gaps in the record, the same institutional silence. And now, an entire stratum of evidence resting under 120 meters of ocean, not destroyed, not scattered by currents, sitting exactly where it was built, in the exact positions it occupied before the water came. The most important archaeological sites on Earth are not buried under desert sand. They are flooded. The equipment to reach them exists. The coordinates are documented. The sonar has already confirmed the geometry. All that is missing is the decision to look. We have studied 18 sites across 6 continents, the same precision, the same impossible logistics, the same silence from the textbooks. This is not a collection of anomalies. It is a pattern, and patterns have a source. The investigation continues. If this investigation has changed how you see the ancient world, subscribe. There is more coming, and the deeper we go, the worse it gets.